Historical reasons for free Palestine territories. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the consolidation of the Byzantine Empire in hands of the Emperor Constantine, Jerusalem became the birthplace of early Christianity. In the first century, according to the New Testament, is the location of the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ. This Christian regime lasted 6 centuries. In the 6th century, the Prophet Muhammad was born. He was the founder of the religion of Islam, as he is regarded by Muslims as a messenger, a prophet of God, that by revelation wrote the holy text of the Quran, the book that contains everything to be a good Muslim. The Islam expansion began with the Arabic Peninsula, with the cities of La Mecca and Medina. The second stage of expansion was through the Middle East, with the territories that nowadays are Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, and Algeria, and of course, Palestine. The third stage of expansion was through North Africa and the Moorish invasion in the Iberian Peninsula.
3.
For 4 centuries, these territories were under control of the Muslim regime by many caliphs that built the sacred burial places of the Dome of the Rock, where it is presumed the Prophet Muhammad sent to the heavens, and the Mosque of Al-Qasar, turning the city in one of the main Muslim cult places in the world. In the 10th century, the Pope called for Christianity to rise up in arms and take Jerusalem for Christians in exchange of forgiveness, glory, and treasures, giving as a result the Crusades and the take of Jerusalem city. Some years later, the bloodbath didn't stop, and the Islam called for a jihad, a term used in the religious context to refer to 3 types of the struggles: an internal struggle to maintain faith, the struggle to improve the Muslim society, or the struggle in a holy war. In head were the Saracens, a tribe of Muslims from all Arab countries commanded by Lord Saladin, who brought back the city territories to its original roots. Centuries later, these territories were occupied by the Mamluks, an unbanked Arab tribe that would later consolidate as the Ottoman Empire and would rule for many centuries. As we can see in this map, this is the full extension of the Ottoman Empire, in taking into account the territories of Damascus, Jerusalem that are now part of the Palestinian territories. Until the First World War I, where the empire fell and the territories passed to the control of the British, who respect Islam as the main religion and ruled the first issue to talk about a creation of the Palestinian.
Why do we need to create a Palestinian state? The answer to that question is pretty simple. As you can see in this map, this was Palestine in 1946. All the green area you see right here. In 1947, smaller. 1949 to 1967, even smaller. And in 2005, we can just see some Palestinian communities around the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Right here, a wall. A wall created by Israel. We need to bring the Palestinians back their lands. We need to bring full generations of Palestinians back their homes. Their homes that they had in 1946, more than 50 years ago, the homes that right now are destroyed or aren't even theirs. Of course, right now we have the state of Israel, but we need to respect them both. We need to respect Palestine and Israel because both have the rights as cultures that they are to have a state and to have defined boundaries. Since the 1940s, the UN has done many efforts to give the Palestinians a state. First of all, under the right of self-determination, a right that determines that any culture has a right to have and to seek for their political well-being, their economical well-being, and to seek a correct political status for their culture. That is what has to be respected for Palestine that hasn't been respected since more than 50 years ago. The right to determine their political situation. Now we have the United Nations Security Council resolutions 242 and 338. Both of them establish that the Palestinians have a right to live securely within their borders. Right now, that right isn't being respected. 50 years ago, that right wasn't being respected. That's why the UN has done so many efforts so that Palestinians can live freely and can live securely within their borders. That will also benefit the Israeli people because there won't be attacks, hopefully, from the Palestinians, terrorists, to the Israeli people because hopefully the UN will be controlling the borderline, as well as there won't be violations of human rights coming from Israel to Palestine because of the same reason. But now let's step up to a more humanitarian side of the conflict. Right now you see in that picture the suffering of the Palestinians in the 1960s. And in this picture you can see the suffering of the Palestinians nowadays. As you can see, that kid has the same right as we do to go walking from his house to the school without being pointed with a gun or without being inspected. But in this moment his right is being violated because the Israeli military thinks they can control the whole area. They're not respecting the rights of the Palestinian people, as well as they didn't respect the Palestinian rights more than 50 years ago. 300,000 Palestinians have died since the 1960s. 90% of those deaths were avoidable under the creation of a Palestinian state. But we still have time. All those people are dead, but we still have time to save new lives, lives to come. If we create a Palestinian state in which they can be securely within their borders and in which their rights could be respected. That will be the solution, the only solution to this situation happening in the Middle East. And it is a Palestinian kid saying to an Israeli soldier, "You killed my father, you killed my relatives, how do you expect me to like you, how do you expect me to respect you?" It is impossible under those conditions. If the Palestinian rights are being violated, it is impossible that they respect the Israeli people. The only way is to create a Palestinian state in which the rights of both Israeli people and Palestinian people will be equal. But it's all in your hands. Bring peace back, bring dignity back to the Palestinians, bring more education and more technology. It is in your hands. But most importantly, to bring freedom to the Palestinian people. It is in your hands.
Palestine as a state. During the last 50 years, Palestine has suffered of violence, discrimination, racial segregation. They have seen their family dies, they have been forced to leave their hometowns, and they have been left without a life. Since 1946, Israel has expanded and occupied more than 80% of the Palestinian territory. Within this process, they have killed the love of Palestine. They have taken away their homes, their culture, and everything they love. One of the biggest examples of how Israel violates Palestinian people's rights is the Palestinian Wall. That this is a wall built by Israel that not only segregated and discriminated Palestinian people, but forced the people that was around and inside that wall to move out and leave their homes behind. Israel attacks Palestine with the excuses they are attacking terrorists. But as an example, in 2009, Israel performed the biggest attack in the history of Palestine. This was the massacre of Gaza. As a result of that, there were 1,400 Palestinian casualties. So we ask ourselves, what do we call terrorism and who is really the terrorist in this conflict? Palestine has always looked for a peaceful solution, but Jewish has sabotaged them every time. In 2000, President Bill Clinton united Yasser Arafat and the Israel leader of that time to make a peace treatment. But as the Jewish didn't want the treatment, they sabotaged the treatment by using all their power, like their TV channels like CNN. Also, Israel accepts the stop fire, like the one of the resolution 1701 from the Security Council, but do not accomplish them. They don't follow them, and they still attacking Palestine. In order to stop the conflict, the only solution I find was to make Palestine as a state, but hopefully divide the Palestinian territories in the way that the UN originally divided it back in 1947, having 50% for the Jews, 50% for the Arabs, and making Jerusalem an independent city, which was regulated and administered by the UN. Making Palestine an state would define the limits, the boundaries, and that would guarantee that Israel could not occupy anymore their territories, at least not legally. When a country occupies another state's territory, is considered colonization, and in the UN Charter appears that this is illegal. So Israel could not do it anymore. Also, the called terrorists could now join the political fight and stop the weapon fight, because they won't fear anymore, because they would know that they are not going to be attacked anymore by Israel. Bottom line, with the creation of a Palestinian state, the Palestinian people could stop their extermination, could reorganize and could prosper it.